Okay, so we'll begin doing one time, we'll do the salutation to the, well, first we'll do the three bows, mental bows to the Buddha. One, two, three. And then we'll do the salutation. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the fully enlightened one. Okay, so good morning, everybody. And we are now at August 30th. So time has really moved very quickly. And so I'm going to share the screen. We'll do it this way. Okay. Okay, is the text visible?
Yes, Bhante, we can see the text.
Okay. Okay, so we are reading now in the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses of the Buddha, Book of Sevens. We are still in Sutta number 49, and the theme of the sutta are seven perceptions which, when developed and cultivated, are said to be of great fruit and benefit. And these two words that are used here, quite important. You shouldn't overlook them. Developed and cultivated. So it's not a matter of just doing these cultivated or practicing these perceptions once in a while, but one develops them. That's I think bhavita, and then cultivates them. Baholi karoti, bhaveti, baholi karoti. So you develop and cultivate them, and then they become of great fruit and benefit. And the ultimate benefit is that they culminate in the deathless, and they reach their fulfillment in the deathless, the amata dhatu, and that deathless is nibbana. And so just to go through the seven perceptions again, just quickly, we have the perception of unattractiveness, which means the unattractive or non-beautiful nature of the body. And that is, as we explained last week, that's practiced by dissecting the body mentally in terms of its constituents, the various components of the body. So from the outside, the body can look picture perfect, beautiful, enticing, attractive. When you look, what is that beautiful and attractive body? What is it really? But it's a combination of various organs, tissues, and fluids. And so we go through it in terms of the classical list of 32 components of the body, from the hairs of the head, hairs of the body, nails, teeth, skin, then to the internal components, organs, tissues, fluids, and so forth, to dispel the perception of attractiveness or beauty and see the non-beautiful or unattractive nature of the body. And this perception of unattractiveness is particularly prescribed by the Buddha as the antidote to kama raga, to sensual lust, which thrives on the perception of beauty. And so when this perception of unattractiveness is developed and cultivated, it brings this disenchantment, we could say, with the beautiful appearance of the body. Then the perception of death is prescribed as the antidote to this deep clinging and attachment to life. And so one develops a perception of death, the various themes are suggested for developing the contemplation of death. And probably what's most useful that I found in the long run is to contemplate oneself at the moment of death, that one is lying, could be in a hospital bed or a bed in your room, maybe with relatives around or maybe alone, and death is come on, that moment that we spend our whole life dreading that moment when death arrives, but now we bring it to life, so to speak. We bring the perception of death to life by vividly contemplating that moment, that day, that hour, that minute, that second, when death comes and snatches away our life. And that, though it might be scary when you contemplate it, superficially, when you contemplate it superficially, but when you do this as a practice, in the long run, it gives a great sense of relief that you could just let go of that deep clinging attachment to life and just let go of this grip of the body, this grip of life, and just pass on peacefully. The perception of the repulsiveness of food, again, I don't have much firsthand experience in doing this as a deliberate exercise, but what I found is that when you take food and you practice mindful eating, then you lose the interest or the attachment, the excitement over the taste of food. And so food just becomes something to nourish the body, to sustain the life of the body. And the way I've done it, as I explained last week, is you mindfully attend to the act of eating in terms of breaking it down into 5 stages or phases of picking up the food, putting it in the mouth, chewing, tasting, and swallowing. And then when you do this over and over, first the excitement over the taste of food fades away. It just becomes the act of eating. And then you get filled pretty quickly. You don't feel the need to keep on eating over to take more and more bites. But when you feel that the body has had enough food, then you can just stop eating without any craving for more taste. The perception of non-delight in the whole world, this isn't just, we don't find a systematic explanation of this in the suttas or even very much in the commentaries. So this is something I think where you have to do your own, find your own way of doing this. Just bring up themes that sort of help to dispel taking delight in the world. And I would say that these 4 perceptions or these 4 contemplations become the means of generating, we're taking them together, generating the mind of renunciation. So what they all have in common is that they bring a sort of, they deflate and disempower the force of craving or attachment to the enjoyment of things in the world. And they propel the mind in the direction of renunciation. They're not yet the insight that severs, that cuts off the bonds, but they, when you do them, develop and cultivate them. Bhaveti, baholi karoti. Then they have this powerful impact on the mind of turning the mind away from the things that they are opposed to. The perception of beauty in the body and sensual lust, attachment to life, delight and excitement over food, and delight in the world. And the Buddha, in the elaboration of each contemplation, he uses the simile of, I didn't do the experiment. I was thinking to do it over the week with a turkey feather that we found, throwing it into a fire to see what happens, to see whether it shrinks away, turns back, rolls away from it. And so this becomes the test to see whether one has succeeded in developing these contemplations. In the first case, that the mind turns away from the idea of sexual indulgence. In the second case, it turns away from attachment to life. In the third case, it turns away from craving for taste. And in the fourth case, it shrinks away from the beautiful things, the variety of beautiful things in the world. So if you happen to find yourself in a shopping mall, you're not drawn into all of the shops. Wow, what's for sale here? Nice clothes, perfume shop, clothing shop, perfume shop, electronic goods. What other shops? The toy shop with the Hello Kitty dolls and the, what is that little tiger? So all of those things that we normally get fascinated with lose their fascination. Okay, so now we continue, and now we come to the other three perceptions, which are involved more directly with the development of actual insight. So these are the perceptions that lead to experiential insight into the what are called the three lakkhana, the three marks of existence. That is impermanence, dukkha, translated as suffering, and anatta, non-self. And so first we have the perception of impermanence. So this is called the anicca sanya. And the Buddha says that when a monk or any practitioner often dwells with a mind that's become familiarized with the perception why did I put, we don't need that. When the mind becomes accustomed to the perception of impermanence, then the mind shrinks away from gain, honor, and praise, turns back from them, rolls away from them, and is not drawn towards them. And either equanimity or revulsion becomes settled in him. Actually, this reminds me, I saw last week, I don't get to see the chat box until after the class, that there was quite a lot of discussion going on last week about that word in the chat box. That's translated here, revulsion. The Pali word is patikula. It's with a long U.
I think Bhante, pratikul in Sanskrit would be opposition, and like anukul is in favor, pratikul is in opposition.
Say again?
Pratikul, Patikul in Pali, I think it's Pratikul in Sanskrit, which is in opposition.
Yeah,
Like, some, yeah,
yeah. So it's going against something.
against it. Yeah,
And then the opposite of that, I think it's anukula,
yeah, in favor,
going along with something.
along with
Yeah,
something.
so
Yeah.
this is like turning back. Yeah, so English word revulsion, maybe it's not so satisfactory because English word revulsion suggests like an emotional aversion. But this is not an emotional aversion, but it's a turning back or turning away. Just like in that simile, the feather thrown into the fire sort of shrinks away, turns away from the fire. I guess it's the blast of the heat from the fire that pushes the light feather away. Yeah, so the fact that here the perception of impermanence is said to be the antidote for gain, honor, and praise seems to me to be indicating what I would call a rather coarse level of the perception of impermanence. Maybe the idea of impermanence that becomes imprinted on the mind through contemplative reflection. So in this way, you could do like a contemplative reflection on impermanence, where you reflect not just in a superficial way, but repeatedly how like everything in this world is impermanent, is bound to pass away. So all of the titles that we might receive, in a way, this almost ties in with the perception of death. We get high positions, you're president of this, chairman of this, consultant on that, secretary of this department, um, president of the United States, prime minister of Great Britain, secretary general of the United Nations. Um, You get praise. Oh, he's the greatest, the most wonderful, honors, plaques, um, certificates, and so on. But when you do the reflection that this life is going to come to an end, again, that's a coarse level of impermanence, then all of those positions, status symbols, certificates, honors, praise, lose their grip on the mind. And then you could do like again, it's a very broad reflection on impermanence that even this earth, millions of years in the future, it's going to be, the sun is going to explode at some point, and this whole solar system is just going to be obliterated, utterly obliterated. And so we have these countries fighting over these little strips of land, like a strip of land on the eastern edge of Ukraine. They call it the Donbass. Hundreds and probably thousands and thousands of lives have been lost fighting over that strip of land. And there'll come a time when there's no Ukraine, no Russia, all gone, just turned to cinders. We have Israel with the occupation of the West Bank, war on the Gaza Strip, thousands and thousands of people killed. There's going to come a time, again, thousands of years, millions of years, there won't even be a Middle East. There won't be a North America, South America. Nothing will be left. So why are people fighting over these just pieces of land? Okay, so when you do it, that's a rather coarse perception of impermanence. And so it sort of dispels the attachment to gain, honor, praise, territory, patriotism, nationalism, racial identification, and so on. All of that gets obliterated with the perception of impermanence. But then there is the subtle perception of impermanence. This is really the perception of impermanence that turns into anicca anupassana, the contemplation of impermanence, which is developed through insight meditation. And that is not just the antidote to the attachment to gain, honor, and praise, but that is the antidote to the perception of permanence, which is the deluded perception that we see things as being sort of stable, lasting, enduring. And so how do we develop that perception of impermanence? Usually to develop it, we have to work by developing a very strong foundation of sati or mindfulness, bringing a certain degree of samadhi or concentration. And then we could develop it both through sitting meditation and walking meditation. Say with the sitting meditation, one could begin, say if you're doing the mindfulness of breathing, one would be noticing the distinction between in-breath and out-breath. So when you're breathing in, then the in-breath comes to an end and replaced by breathing out. So then you're following the out-breath. The out-breath comes to an end, and then you're breathing in. And so you notice each time, end of in-breath, end of out-breath, end of in-breath, out of out-breath. So you're seeing each breath is impermanent. Then you break the in-breath down into the beginning, middle, and end. And so you see how even the in-breath has these three phases: start, duration, ending. The out-breath, start, duration, ending. And so now you've broken the breath into three portions. And then as one goes on attending with sharper and sharper mindfulness, you start to see, even during the duration phase of the breath, there are many little sort of like jerks or changes within the duration of the breath. And so similarly with the in-breath and out-breath. And so you're seeing with very, very close attention the constant changing, the phase succession, the fragmentation of the breath into these little phases. Each is discrete, followed by the other. And so in this way, like in the sutta on the mindfulness of breathing, one dwells contemplating impermanence when breathing in, contemplating impermanence when breathing out. So that's one way to develop it, through mindfulness of breathing. And then through the walking meditation. Okay, so we could start off by distinguishing the right step from the left step. And so when you're taking the right step, you realize, okay, this is a right step. When you're taking the left step, you know this is the left step. The right step comes to an end, replaced by the left step. The left step comes to an end, replaced by the right step. And so you're seeing the distinction between right step and left step, how each step comes to an end. So that's the beginning, the entry to impermanence through the walking meditation. But then you can break each step down into the phase of picking up, pushing forward, putting down. So you have three phases in each step. So when you're taking the right step, you see that picking up occurs, comes to an end, replaced by pushing, that comes to an end, replaced by putting down, that comes to an end. Then you turn the attention to the left step. Again, picking up is one thing, pushing forward, another phase, putting down, another phase. So now you have it step broken down into three phases. Then you can break the step down. There's a way to break it down into 6 phases. And the way I was taught to do it back in Sri Lanka is when you get to the 6 stages, you notice the distinction in the intention and the physical movement. So you have the intention to pick up the foot, then the act of picking up the foot, the intention to push the foot forward, the act of putting the foot forward, intention to push the foot away, then the act of pushing the foot away, intention to put the foot down, the act of putting the foot down, intending to press down, and then the act of pressing down. And so in this way, you get the act with one step, you get 12 phases. 6 are the intentions, and 6 are the physical acts of walking. And as you're doing this, like for walking for 30 minutes or even extending it to like an hour of walking, it builds up very, very strong momentum so that you don't even have to use noting the different phases, but just the very act of lifting and bringing the foot forward just spontaneously gets broken down or fragmented into little minute events or flickers in the act of walking. And you see how this act of walking is a series of discrete events arising and passing, arising and passing. So that becomes the perception of impermanence. The commentaries say that it's just like, or we'll say it's like when you put, the popcorn, you throw the popcorn onto a very hot pan, the popcorn bursts and it turns, or the pop seeds, the corn seeds, throw them onto the hot pan and they burst and turn into popcorn. So it's just like pop, 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 pop. So in one step, each phase is like popping, 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 popping to the end of the step. So in this way, you're getting the very, very sharp perception of impermanence. And that is the antidote, not just to the attachment to gain, honor, and praise, but it becomes the antidote to Nietzsche Sanya, to the perception of permanence. Okay, so this is the 5th perception of impermanence. Okay, now we come to the 6th. And this is called the perception of, let's say, dukkha in what is impermanent. Yeah, so we translate suffering, but it's not really suffering the way we ordinarily understand this English word. But this is dukkha as if you could say, the unsatisfactory nature of what is impermanent. And the way the commentaries explain this, they say that this is the sense of oppression by rise and fall. The sense that through the perception of impermanence, you're seeing how everything within your experience is breaking up and perishing. So you develop the perception of impermanence. Actually, you sort of extend it by applying it to the 5 aggregates. So once you can get the perception of impermanence through the breath or through the walking meditation, then you can take your meditation seat and you begin by contemplating the body or material form of the body, seeing that the body is constantly, everything in the body is constantly arising and vanishing. You could even like experience this down at the level of the cells of the body, how they're always in a process of changing and transformation, and even the molecules of the cells just always breaking up and passing away and being replaced by new molecule formations. So one works through the physical form, which is the coarser, then one moves to the feeling, the Vedana, always changing, sometimes pleasant feeling, sometimes painful feeling, sometimes neutral feeling. Always the feelings are arising and passing away. Then one moves to the perceptions, and if you're doing the sitting meditation, you're not perceiving outer things, but just the flow of ideas in the mind, always arising and passing. And then the acts of volition, the intention, even just the intention to observe, to contemplate, is always new intention, new volition arising and passing. And then the awareness of this, which seems to be the stable, persistent observer, but when you bend the beam of awareness back on the observer dissolves into a series of acts of observation. So the consciousness aggregate turns into a stream or flow of acts of cognition. So in this way, you get the perception of impermanence in regard to the five aggregates. And then one gets the sense that this constant arising and passing of all the five aggregates going on without interruption, that this is experienced as dukkha, somehow unsatisfactory. We could say something not worth clinging to. And it gets a sense of an inherent instability and insecurity in whatever is impermanent. And so the text says that when the mind dwells accustomed to the perception of suffering, the unsatisfactory nature of what is impermanent, then a keen perception of danger becomes settled in him towards indolence, laziness, slackness, heedlessness, lack of effort, and unreflectiveness, just as towards a murderer with a drawn sword. It's a little bit of a scary, scary image, but especially for a lazy monk like me. Okay, but it's when you see how things are always, all of these sankharas, these formations are breaking up and passing away, unreliable, unstable, insecure, then it should generate this sense of, we call this samvega, kind of urge, a sense of urgency, almost a sense of anxiety about laziness that pushes one to very diligent practice. And so when you become indolent, slack, heedless, then you see that as a danger. And then here comes again the acid test. So if one often dwells with a mind that becomes familiarized to the perception of dukkha in the impermanent, but if this keen perception of danger doesn't become settled in one towards indolence, laziness, and so forth, then you should understand I haven't really developed sufficiently the perception of suffering in the impermanent. So you might be practicing it, but it's not yet come to its fulfillment, to its fruition. And so then you clearly comprehend this, and then this will become the motivation for persisting with persisting and developing that perception of dukkha in the impermanent. But if that keen perception of danger in laziness and slackness becomes settled, then you can realize I've developed the perception of suffering in the impermanent, that I've been making progress and I've attained the fruit of development. Okay, so this is the perception of the unsatisfactory nature of what is impermanent. And then now we come to the seventh contemplation, and this is the perception of non-self in what is dukkha. And it seems to me, just in my own experience, that you could I find it actually easier to move from the perception of impermanence to the perception of non-self without having to go through the perception of suffering. But maybe it's different for different people. But I think maybe the idea here is that maybe it's rooted in an old ancient Indian way of thinking that what you take to be the self is inherently blissful. I think in the Upanishads, one has the idea Sat Chit Ananda. So the Brahman, the universal reality, which is identical with the Atman, is said to be Sat, which is true, real, substantial, Chit, to have the nature of awareness, and Ananda, to be blissful. And so to knock away the perception of self, the Buddha points to the five aggregates as being the reference of the idea of self. So when we ever entertain the idea of self, that idea of self is always entangled with and tied up with these five aggregates. And these five aggregates are impermanent. And so they lack this aspect of sat, of being truly existent, substantially existent. And the five aggregates are dukkha, and that undercuts the idea of ananda, of being blissful. And so then you see that the five aggregates being dukkha, that they cannot be blissful, and so then they cannot be identified as a self. So that is how one moves from perception of suffering to the perception of non-self. But I find it, as I said, somewhat easier in my own experience to go from impermanence to non-self, since if you're looking where are you going to locate the self, it's going to be someplace in the five aggregates. But when you look at the five aggregates, you see they're arising and passing away. So how could you identify them as a self? If I say the body is myself, the body is arising and passing away. That means myself is arising and passing. Or the subtlest of the five aggregates is consciousness. So this is the chid, maybe in the Upanishadic way of thinking, the awareness. But consciousness, the aggregate of consciousness, is always arising and passing away. So how do you identify consciousness as being the true self? So even consciousness turns out to be, because it's arising and vanishing, it turns out to be non-self. And so then the Buddha says, or he continues, he says that when one often dwells with the mind has become familiarized, habituated to the perception of non-self and what is dukkha, then the mind becomes freed of I-making, mind-making, and conceit regarding this conscious body and all external objects. So when it speaks about this conscious body, it's savignana, it's savignanaka kaya. It's this body together with consciousness. So when it speaks of consciousness, it's implicitly including the other three mental aggregates along with consciousness. So we have the body as the aggregate of material form. Consciousness here represents feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. And the natural tendency of the mind is to grasp upon these five aggregates as being I or myself, and then to take external things, or even the five aggregates themselves, as being mine. So we're constantly creating the idea of I or self and mine, and then building up on these five aggregates conceit. And conceit takes the three forms, which is indicated by this discrimination, the discrimination of being superior, equal, or inferior. So those are the three modes of conceit. So they build up on the basis of these five aggregates, the body with consciousness, or in regard to external objects, especially the mind making. And so even if you don't gain deep experiential insight into non-self, but you could do this even just as a simple reflection. And I find this to be quite useful, even as part of like a daily meditation practice where you don't have strong samadhi or strong mindfulness, but you can just move through reflectively through the five aggregates, just thinking this body is not mine, not I, not myself. And you just attend momentarily to the feelings, maybe using the physical sensations. The body is not mine, or the feelings are not mine, not I, not myself. And usually, often we become attached to our ideas. We could say the ideas here represent the perceptions. These perceptions or ideas are not mine, not I, not myself. Then our projects, our intentions, our purposes, the mental formations, not mine, not I, not myself. And then even the awareness of all of this, the consciousness, is not mine, not I, not myself. And so this collection of the five aggregates that we usually take to be mine, I, myself, this is not mine, not I, not myself. And if you do this regularly, you see that the mind can become very peaceful and very free. Doesn't have to be the full final liberation, but you feel the mind is getting freed from this attachment to the sense of I and mine, and free from the need to compare yourself with others and rank yourself. I'm better, I'm equal, I'm inferior. Okay, and then the test is the same or parallel to the others. So when you practice this, if the mind is not devoid, or at least if you're not reducing reducing this I-making, mind-making, and conceit in regard to your own person and external things, then you should understand I've not reached the fruit of this development. But if your mind becomes peaceful and free from I-making, mind-making, and conceit, then you should understand that you are at least making progress in this practice. And then just to conclude, the Buddha sort of just sums up and says, these 7 perceptions developed and cultivated are of great fruit and benefit. They culminate in the deathless, and they reach their fulfillment in the deathless. Okay, we could see whether we have any questions. And if you have questions, you can use the hand symbol. Okay, I see Doran, Vandana, and Josh.
Thank you, Bhante, for such clear exposition of this sutta. So much fun. A small refinement requested on the perception of impermanence. I remember having asked this of a friend who's a physics professor, is everything in the universe impermanent? You know, us Buddhists, we believe that. Would modern physics support that? And he said, yes, absolutely. Except there was a small exception that, you know, things like constants like the speed of light or the laws of physics. So the content of the universe is all in flux, according to him. But the laws of physics perhaps are not, because otherwise how could we even, they imply that everything is in flux. How could we even talk about it? And that made me wonder whether the same applies to the Dhamma. In other words, is the Dhamma in flux? Is the Dhamma true today but not true tomorrow? For example, take the law of flux itself. That is a constant.
Okay, yeah. What's actually said is that sabbe sankhara anicca. So sankharas are things that are produced through conditions. So it's the laws themselves are not sankhara, at least traditionally, they're not considered sankharas. So the laws, I belong in one category. Sankharas belong in a different category. So the sankharas are things that are produced through conditions. And so the sankharas are impermanent, but the laws are the descriptions of how sankharas operate. So the laws can be permanent, or at least constant, but the sankharas themselves are the things that produced by conditions necessarily arise and pass away. So I think that takes care of that objection.
Thank you.
Yeah, in fact, there's a sutta. It was actually in the Anguttara Nikaya book of 3, I think it's a book of 3s, where the Buddha says that all sankharas are impermanent, whether Buddhas arise or do not arise. This Dhamma Dhatu, this law of Dhamma, this Dhamma Titi, this principle of Dhamma remains constant, namely that all sankharas are impermanent, and that all sankharas are dukkha, and that all dhammas are non-self. So those things, those principles remain constant, but the things themselves arise and pass away.
Thank you. So it's similar to physics in a way. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, Vandana.
Yeah, thank you, Bhante, again. Thank you so much. Your explanation was very, very thorough. And one thing which is sanskars or sankhara. Sanskar is actually a very common word in Hindi language, also Sanskrit. That things which are put together, meaning it could be anything, your ideas or things or anything. So put together, anything you put together cannot be permanent because they are not a single entity. So that's the thing when in Indian culture people say, oh, you got really good sanskar from your family, meaning they taught you good. They
Yeah.
taught you so these are all changed because they are not universal. They are subjective, right? Different people can teach different things, so they cannot be permanent. So sanskar is that, and Sat Chit Anand, which you mentioned. So Sat is, as you said, the truth, and the Chit is awareness or mind. You can say like a heart, and Anand. So that's not talking about the body at all. They're talking about only the happiness of the heart or chitta or soul, they can call it. So that's also completely disregarding the body, which Buddha mentioned very specifically, that body mind works together. Unless you for example, the dukkha example, you said that dukkha can be for me, dukkha is very apparent because this body, when you start to see this body is getting sick, even you're sitting for a long time, your body is hurting, you have to keep changing the posture, and the body is kind of like a weather impacted, everything is impacted the body. So the dukkha is very apparent for me personally, so I go from there. But everything, yeah, you're everything very, very nicely explained, everything. Thank you, Bante.
Okay. Okay. Thank
just,
you.
just a comment.
Okay. So I think Josh.
Hi, thank you, Bhante. Can you hear me? Hello? Bhante, can you hear me?
Wait, I'm not here. I'm just hearing very lightly the voice.
Oh, um,
No, I think you have to increase your volume or get closer to the microphone.
how about this?
Mm, do you hear? No, we're not hearing the voice. I mean, I hear a voice, but it's very, very weak.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Oh, okay. Yeah, now it's completely different. Yeah.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Bhante. Um, my question was, I do think about this sutta a lot. I have a long way to go until I can really fully develop a lot of these qualities, but my question is, when when people such as me are still a layperson and we still have to function in terms of like interacting with others,
Yeah.
and they, ask us how we're doing, what our goals are, what our aspirations are, how do we, you know, in our modern world, they may see that we're depressed or that because we have no clinging or we have no aspirations, where we know that we're actively rejecting being attached or repelled to these things and trying to be eventually liberated. But, when I have to go to work and stuff, and how do I continue
Yeah.
functioning in a social society in a world full of greed and um, desire, and everyone around me is clinging, and I seem depressed, but really I'm just striving for liberation. And
Yeah. Yeah.
my question would be, what do I do? You know? Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, I understand the point of the question. First, we have to recognize that the Buddha is teaching these seven contemplations specifically to the monastics. So it's really intended within the framework of the monastic life. Though I also think it's good for lay people to be aware of these contemplations and to practice them from time to time. It will be beneficial. But one has to be careful. I mean, if one doesn't have the intention of becoming a monastic or a renunciant, be careful about
Right.
pushing these contemplations too far. Otherwise, one becomes too disconnected from the capacity to function within the family life or in the social life. And it can create friction, conflict, or some kind of tense situations.
Thank you, Bhante.
I think
I
it's,
would
yeah,
love to be a monastic someday. I just have a long way to go. Thank you.
yeah, but it's useful to, if one does these contemplations, to counterbalance them to some extent with the, especially I would say with two of the Brahma Vihara qualities, loving kindness and altruistic joy. So that if you just focus on these contemplations, particularly the first four, what one can become a bit I don't want to say depressed, but a bit gloomy in one's outlook.
Right.
You have to sort of counterbalance them with things that give joy and delight and upliftment to the mind.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, so we'll take, I think Thomas is next.
Yes, Bhante, thank you for your discourse. I really appreciate it. I asked this question in the chat. Seeing the impermanence gives one a sense of urgency to be not indolent and lazy and slack, heedless, lack of effort and unreflectiveness. But on the same token, if all is for naught and all is impermanent, surely then what's the reason? I have a sense of nihilism then, and then why not be lazy, detached, unreflective,
I see.
indolent, and lazy?
Yeah, the thing is, what I said is that, like, even this world system, this particular um, solar system in which we're living, this planet Earth is impermanent, but the process of samsara, the cycle of birth and death goes on. And just when this world gets demolished or obliterated, another world system will form. And then we'll be reborn back into that world system. And so we can go on and on and on. And so the Buddha says that the aim is to get liberated from the entire process of repeated birth and death. So if you just become lazy and indolent, then we don't get liberated.
Thank you.
Okay, so Madeline. You have to unmute.
Yes, thank you, Bhante. I just wanted to add a little comment, which is, I mean, as well as contemplating impermanence and the insubstantiality and the unreliability of everything in the world, we can also learn this through personal experience. That's been my experience. I've had some experiences in my life where I know absolutely this world is just completely under, anything can happen at any time. And it's not a pleasant way to learn about it, but it's definitely a good teacher.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that.
Okay.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay. Okay, and then V.
Yes, good morning, Bhante. In physics, there is a law saying that the energy will never disappear. It cannot be created, and it cannot be it can only be transformed. So I'm just wondering, in the Anapanasati, the fourth tetrad, where Buddha said that the contemplation of impermanence and fading away, cessation, and at the end, relinquish. So when you let go, the energy is still there. Because, I mean, how do you at the finally relinquish? It's just like releasing the ball, and at the end, it looks, the bouncing of the ball stops, but the energy is still there. So my question is that where's the Buddha's energy? Because the Buddha went into paranirvana.
Yeah.
Does the Buddha still have the energy left? Because the energy can only be transformed. It cannot disappear. I'm not sure whether you got my meaning.
mean, certainly at the level of physical reality, at least they say that energy is not, does not vanish. Energy does not, yeah, I don't have a background in physics, but I think at the physical level, energy never disappears. It just changes its forms.
Yeah.
But what happens when the Buddha enters into parinibbana is that this succession or sequence of repeated birth and death comes to an end, that there's no more craving. And so when there's no more craving in the mind stream, then there's no production of a new existence in the future. And that's it.
Okay. Thank you. Sadhu.
Oh, I see. Okay. Anfong has a question here. I could hear you, but not so well.
And I just wonder if we can develop the perception of for the greatest good, like for uplifting the mind instead of focus on the negative. Because like if we develop the perception of peace, and then the mind will be easier to
Okay.
get liberated rather than on the
You mean
negative.
rather than focus on these
Yeah,
in
like
this negative way,
yeah,
focus on peace.
yeah, and like all the beautiful thing in the world, and because
Yeah. Okay. You could also do a kind of, there is a contemplation of peace. It's one of the 10, um, what do they call the 10 anusatis? It's the recollection of peace. Yeah.
where is that, Bhante? Where is that from, Bhante?
It's mentioned in the Visuddhimagga that one reflects on the qualities of nibbana as being the state of ultimate peace. So this is peaceful, this is blissful, this is happy, the subsiding of all sankharas, the relinquishment of all attachments, and so forth.
Thank you, Bhante.
And there are ways to uplift the mind. Also, the anusatis, the 6 anusatis, also bring upliftment to the mind. So, for example, recollection of the qualities of the Buddha, recollection of the Dhamma, recollection of the virtues of the Sangha. And then you could recollect generosity, recollecting the silas, the precepts that one has taken, even recollection of the devas. Those are sort of positive reflections that bring joy and delight to the mind. Okay, so I think we're going to have to end our session now. And so we'll end with the sharing of the merits. Okay, so I'll recite the verses for sharing the merits. Before I do this, I should mention next Saturday, we won't be having a class since I won't be here. So the next class will be the Saturday after that. I think it's the 13th, September 13th. Akasata cha bhumata devanaga mahidika panyanta manumoditva chirangra kantu sasanam. Akasata cha bhumata devanaga mahidika panyanta manumoditva chirangra kantu desanam. Akasata cha bhumata devanaga mahidika panyanta manumoditva chirangra kantu mang parang dukkha pata cha nidukkha bhaya pata cha nibhaya soka pata cha nisoka antu sabe pipanino. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be thus. And then we're going to stand up and we'll do 3 bows to the Buddha.
All beings be free. Okay, thank you. What are the ethnicities?
And a bow to Bhante Bodhi, our teacher. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, so thank you everybody for joining this morning or
Thank you,
this
Bhante.
afternoon.
Thank you, Bhante. Be safe, be
Thank you so much,
well.
Bhante.
Take care, Bhante. Teruvan sarnai. Namo
Thank you,
buddhaya.
Bhante. Thank you.
Bye, Bhante.
Thank you,
See you in 2 weeks on
Sir.
Saturday. But we see you on the Wednesday class, Bhante.
Good health to everybody.
Thank you, Bhante. Yeah. Teruvan sarnai. Namo buddhaya.